Chapter 1. You made it hard before it even started. You walk up to her already trying to perform, and that's why everything feels harder than it should. Before you even say anything, your mind is running through what to say, how to say it, how it might land, how she might respond. You're not in the moment, you're ahead of it, trying to control something that hasn't happened yet. That pressure shows up immediately, even if you think you're hiding it well. And the second that pressure is there, flirting stops being natural and starts feeling like something you have to get right. You've felt this more times than you want to admit. You approach, you say something, and instead of it flowing, it feels like you're holding the conversation together. You're thinking about your next line while she's still talking, adjusting your tone mid-sentence, trying to keep everything smooth. It doesn't feel like interaction, it feels like management. And the more you try to manage it, the more disconnected it becomes from anything real. Flirting isn't hard. You just made it serious. You treat the moment like it matters too much, like something has to come from it, like it needs to go somewhere, like there's a result you're trying to reach. That mindset changes how you carry yourself in ways you don't notice. It tightens your delivery, it limits your spontaneity, it makes everything feel slightly forced. And she feels that immediately, even if she doesn't think about it. You've been approaching flirting like it's a test. Like there's a right way to do it, a wrong way to do it, something you can mess up if you're not careful. That mindset creates hesitation in places where there should be none. It makes you second-guess things that don't need to be thought about. And that hesitation shows up in how you speak, how you move, how you respond. Look at how you act when you're talking to someone you don't care about impressing. You're relaxed, you're present, you say things without thinking about them too much. There's no pressure behind it, no expectation attached to it. That's why it flows without effort. That's what flirting actually feels like when you're not trying to turn it into something. But the moment you decide she matters, everything changes. You tighten up, you start filtering yourself, you try to be more careful. That shift doesn't make you better, it makes you less natural. And that's the part that throws everything off, because now you're not being experienced in real time. You're being evaluated through the effort you're putting in. You don't realize how obvious that effort is. You think it's hidden, you think you're controlling it, but it shows up in small ways. In your timing, in your tone, in how quickly you react. It creates a kind of tension that wasn't there before. And that tension is what makes flirting feel difficult. You're trying to get it right instead of letting it happen. That's why it feels like work. That's why it doesn't flow. That's why it feels like something you have to think through instead of something you just do. You already know how to flirt. You just don't act like it when it matters. If this hit you in a way that felt a little too accurate, don't just scroll past it. Like the video and subscribe. Because once you understand what's actually happening here, you stop making this harder than it needs to be. Chapter 2. You keep trying to impress instead of engage. You walk into the interaction thinking you need to offer something, and that's where everything starts to feel off. You're not just talking to her, you're presenting yourself, shaping your words to sound better, trying to land in a way that makes her see you a certain way. That intention sits behind everything you say, even when your words are simple. It creates a layer that doesn't need to be there, something that turns a basic interaction into something that feels slightly forced. And the more you try to present, the less you actually connect. There was a situation that made this obvious in a way that stuck. A guy was talking to a girl in a setting where everything was already set up for things to be easy. Music was playing, people were around, the environment was relaxed, nothing about it required effort. He started the conversation fine, asked a question, got a response, and there was a moment where things could have just flowed naturally. Then he shifted without realizing it. He started adding more to everything he said, turning simple responses into longer ones, trying to make them sound interesting. He told stories that didn't need to be told, added details that didn't matter, tried to keep her engaged by giving more. She responded, but her responses stayed short, like she was listening without leaning in. That difference started shaping the interaction, even if it wasn't obvious at first. He kept going, thinking he just needed to keep it interesting, keep the energy up, keep her attention. But the more he did that, the more it felt like he was talking at her instead of with her. The conversation didn't build. It stretched. And after a few minutes, it ended the way most of those interactions do, not with anything wrong, just with a lack of connection. What happened there wasn't about confidence or lack of it. It came from how he approached the interaction. He treated it like he needed to prove something, like he needed to offer value through what he said. That mindset changed how everything felt, because it shifted the focus away from the moment and onto himself. And once that shift happens, the interaction stops being shared. You've done the same thing in your own way. You've tried to be more interesting, more engaging, more impressive, thinking that would make the interaction better. But in doing that, you've moved away from what actually creates connection. You've turned something simple into something that requires effort, something that needs to be maintained instead of experienced. Here's the line you need to sit with. She's not looking for a performance. That's why your effort doesn't land the way you expect. You think more is better, more words, more stories, more energy. But more creates distance when it's not grounded in the moment. It makes the interaction feel like it's being carried instead of shared. And that difference is easy to feel, even if it's hard to explain. When you stop trying to impress, something changes immediately. Your responses become more direct, your timing becomes more natural, your presence feels lighter. You're no longer thinking about how you come across, you're just responding to what's happening. That shift removes the layer that was making everything feel forced. You don't need to offer anything extra to create attraction. You need to stay in the moment long enough for it to develop naturally. That's what allows things to build without effort. That's what makes it feel real instead of constructed. You've been trying to give her a reason to like you through what you say. That's why it hasn't been working the way you expected. Chapter 3. You don't let the moment breathe. You rush through interactions like something needs to happen immediately, like every second has to be filled with something meaningful. There's no space between what she says and how you respond, no pause where the moment can sit on its own. You jump in quickly, add something, move it forward, keep it active. That speed feels productive in your head, like you're keeping things alive. But what you're actually doing is removing the tension that creates attraction in the first place. You've been in conversations where everything felt like it was moving too fast, even if you didn't consciously think about it. You said something, she responded, and before anything could settle, you were already adding more. There was no time for her to sit with what you said, no moment where the interaction could carry itself. It became a sequence of responses instead of something that had rhythm. And that rhythm is what makes flirting feel effortless when it's there. Attraction builds in the space between what's said, and you keep removing that space. You treat silence like something needs to be fixed. A pause feels uncomfortable, like the interaction is slipping, so you step in to fill it. You add another question, another comment, something to keep it from going quiet. That reaction comes from thinking the moment needs constant input. But the moment you fill every gap, you take away the chance for anything to build on its own. She feels that immediately, even if she doesn't think about it. The interaction becomes predictable, continuous, without variation. There's no tension, no pull, no moment where she has to lean in. It feels like it's being carried instead of unfolding. And once it feels like that, it becomes easier to disengage. You've experienced the opposite without realizing what made it different. A conversation where things felt slower, where there were pauses, where you didn't feel the need to speak immediately. Those moments had weight, even if nothing was happening. They created a kind of presence that didn't need constant reinforcement. And that presence is what made it feel natural. You don't create that by doing more. You create it by allowing moments to exist without interfering with them, letting a response sit, letting a pause happen, letting the interaction carry itself for a second. That space gives her something to step into. It allows her to engage instead of just respond. You've been trying to keep things moving instead of letting them build. That's why it feels like work. That's why it doesn't flow. Because you're doing all the work instead of allowing the moment to do it for you. You don't need to fill every silence. You need to stop being uncomfortable with it. That's where everything starts to change. When you slow down, your responses come from where you actually are instead of from urgency. Your timing becomes natural. Your presence feels grounded. Your words carry more weight because they're not rushed. That shift changes how the interaction feels without you needing to say anything different. You've been trying to control the flow instead of letting it happen. And that's what's been making something simple feel complicated. Chapter 4. You say everything too safely. You choose your words like you're trying to avoid making a mistake, and it shows in ways you don't catch in real time. Every sentence feels measured. Every response feels filtered, like you're making sure nothing lands wrong. You keep things neutral, agreeable, easy to respond to. It feels controlled, like you're keeping the interaction smooth. But smooth isn't what creates tension, and without tension, nothing sticks. You've had conversations where nothing went wrong, and yet nothing stood out either. You said the right things, she responded. Everything stayed polite and easy. Then it ended without leaving anything behind. No spark, there's no pull, no reason for her to think about it later. That's what safe communication does. It keeps everything intact while removing anything that creates interest. Here's what you don't say out loud, but you act on. You're trying to avoid risk. And that choice shows up in every sentence. You keep your opinions light, your tone agreeable, your words predictable. You don't challenge, you don't tease, you don't let anything land with weight. You stay in a space where everything is easy to accept. That space feels comfortable, but it doesn't create anything memorable. It turns the interaction into something that can be replaced without effort. She doesn't need you to be perfect. She needs to feel something from the interaction. That feeling comes from variation, from moments that stand out, from responses that aren't expected. When everything you say feels safe, there's nothing for her to react to beyond surface level. And surface level engagement fades quickly because it doesn't hold attention. You've seen how different it feels when someone speaks without filtering everything. Their words carry more presence, more weight, more direction. It's not about being extreme or saying something outrageous. It's about saying what you actually think without softening it into something neutral. That difference changes how the interaction feels immediately. You hesitate before saying things that could shift the dynamic. You hold back comments that could create tension. You avoid moments that could push the interaction forward. That hesitation comes from trying to keep everything controlled. But that control removes the unpredictability that makes flirting feel alive. You don't need to say more. You need to say what you actually think. That's where the shift happens. When your words reflect where you are instead of what you think will land well, they carry a different kind of weight. They create reactions instead of just responses. And that reaction is what builds interest over time. You've been trying to keep everything smooth instead of making it real. That's why it hasn't been landing the way you expected. You don't get remembered for being safe. You get remembered for being felt. And that's the part you've been avoiding without realizing it. Chapter 5. You stop trying to make it happen. You've been approaching flirting like something you need to produce, like an outcome you're responsible for creating in real time. Every interaction carries a sense that something should come from it, that there's a direction it needs to go, that you need to guide it there. That pressure sits quietly behind how you move, shaping your timing, your tone, your decisions. It turns something simple into something that feels like it requires effort to maintain. And the moment it requires effort, it stops feeling natural on both sides. You don't notice how much you're trying to make something happen until you stop doing it. There's a shift that takes place when you stop treating the interaction like it needs to go somewhere. You're still present, still engaged, still aware, but there's no underlying push. You're not trying to build, not trying to advance, not trying to secure anything from it. That absence of pressure changes how everything feels without you needing to say anything different. Here's the line you need to sit with. Flirting happens when you're not trying to create it. That's why it's been harder than it should be. You've been adding intention where there should just be presence. That intention shows up in small ways, in how you respond, how you position yourself, how you carry the interaction forward. It creates a kind of weight that wasn't there before, and that weight is what makes everything feel like it needs to be managed instead of experienced. When you stop trying to make something happen, your attention shifts. You start noticing what's actually there instead of trying to shape it into something else. You respond to what's happening instead of what you want to happen. That change affects how you speak, how you listen, how you engage. It removes the layer that was making everything feel slightly forced. You don't need to push the moment forward for it to build. When the interaction has the right energy, it carries itself without needing direction. It moves in a way that feels natural, where both sides are engaged without effort. That's what flirting actually feels like when you're not interfering with it. It's not something you control. It's something you allow. You've experienced this before, even if you didn't recognize it at the time. A conversation where you weren't thinking about what to say, where things just flowed without effort, where nothing felt like it needed to be forced. That feeling didn't come from doing more. It came from not trying to turn it into something. That's where the shift happens, in how you approach the interaction itself. When you remove the need for an outcome, everything becomes easier to navigate. Your responses come from where you are instead of where you're trying to get. Your presence feels grounded because it's not tied to a result, and that difference changes how she experiences you. If this connected with how you've been moving, say something below that reflects it. Share this with someone who's been making this harder than it needs to be. And subscribe if you want more of this, because once you understand it, you stop forcing things that were never meant to be forced. That's what makes flirting feel easy, not because it requires less effort, but because you're no longer trying to create something that already knows how to happen.